All right, we'll give it just another moment or two, and then we will go ahead and get started. Before we sort of formally get started, I'll just ask, if you participated yesterday in the self-care and wellness learning community conversation, type a Y in the chat. And if you're unsure what that is, type a U in the chat. So Guillermo, yes. Anyone who Atunde, yes. Wayne, of course. Excellent. So a number of you I had the opportunity to be in the learning community with yesterday. It seems that an equal number were not participants in that learning community conversation. It's perfectly okay either way. I just wanted to kind of get a sense. And my reason for asking that question will make better sense as we go forward. And that learning community conversation was about self-care and wellness for you as the providers, as the people providing services. And this particular learning community conversation, as you know, is focused on, it's part one of a two-part conversation focused on de-escalation, which is a process that you may be using or may need to use in your interactions as you provide services or as you interact with patients or clients. I want to welcome those of you who I'm meeting for the first time. I want to welcome you to this learning community conversation about de-escalation. And for those of you who I have had the opportunity to be in learning communities about other topics yesterday and even before that, I want to welcome you back to another learning community conversation about de-escalation. I also want to acknowledge that there may be people here who have participated in this learning community conversation about de-escalation in the past. And that's perfectly okay. You're more than welcome, of course, to be here because we are a unique learning community today of about 68 people. And it's probably not the same people that were in the learning community conversation that you participated in before. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure to meet before, I will just give a brief introduction, which is that my name is Paul Warren. I have the privilege and the opportunity to be the facilitator of this learning community conversation along with you, because it is hopefully going to be a conversation. I am currently a research project director at the New York State Psychiatric Institute in Manhattan. I'm broadcasting from my home office today, and I am also a senior staff trainer and curriculum writer for the Northeast and Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center. And those of you who I've been in learning communities with before know, and I will let the other people know, that that does mean that there have been times when I've been forced to go to Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, and St. Croix to train, because that is part of our catchment area. Although I want to assure you that there are many capable trainers in Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, and St. Croix, so they don't need me. Yeah, I'm quite lucky when I've been forced. It hasn't been for a really long time, though. I'm also a social worker by training. I began my social service career providing direct services to people living with HIV and AIDS in 1991. And I did that work for a little over 12 years. And as you know, with the history of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, that where we are today is very different than where we were in 1991. What I can tell you is the organization that I worked at, I would say 85% of my colleagues were people living with HIV and AIDS. And a number of those folks are still alive today because they were long-term non-progressors, and because in 1996, when effective treatment became available, they were able to get effective, less burdensome treatment for their HIV infection. And I'm sorry to say that a great many of those colleagues died during the course of the 12 years that I had the opportunity to work with them in the organization that I worked at in Manhattan. So we are in a very different place today in terms of HIV and AIDS than we certainly were in 1991. I'm very grateful, though, to have the opportunity to be talking with all of you today about the process of de-escalation. And I'm particularly excited about talking with you about that because oftentimes it's something that we're called upon to do, and we don't really get a whole lot of support in doing it and after we've done it. So my hope is that this learning community conversation will be a piece and maybe some guidance around how you can engage in this process of de-escalation and remain healthy and effective in your work. Because de-escalation is not an easy process to necessarily go through. So having said that, you're very welcome. So I'm going to share my screen, folks, and we'll take care of a couple of logistical details, and then we will begin, continue. We've already begun, but we will continue our conversation. Again, I want to emphasize that this is part one of a two-parter. We've determined, thanks to the help of the learning community, that the part two of this learning community conversation will be next Monday. This learning community conversation is going to be a 6-hour focus on this particular topic. So I want you to notice here on the title slide, and just confirm in the chat by typing a Y that you can actually see the slide. And type a second Y if you can actually see my face talking while you see the slide. And if you can't use the chat, feel free to just, unmute and say you can see it. But I see about 39 people. Okay, so some people are typing double Y. They can see my face as well as the slide. Fantastic. Okay, good. So you'll notice on the slide that it says de-escalation basic tools, and then it says in smaller print for social workers. So the reason for that is that when this course was originally created and the title that it was accredited under was De-escalation Basic Skills for Social Workers. Now, we found in delivering this that a lot of folks, in addition to social workers, are in the position of and called upon to de-escalate. And we also realized that this learning community conversation is for everyone who is in situations, in conversations with patients and clients where they may need to call upon these skills, and I'm intentionally framing it this way. They may intentionally need to call upon these skills while engaging in this process of de-escalation. So the way we maintained, instead of having to rewrite the whole course, because the course was fine, but rewriting the whole course and the objectives, is we simply reduced the font size on the for social workers. And really, if I was going to retitle the course, I would just call it De-escalation Basic Skills for All. So having said that, I want to acknowledge that one does not necessarily need to be a clinician or have a clinical training or degree in order to benefit from and participate in and make valuable contributions to this learning community conversation. As we engage in this learning community conversation, it is important for us to consider and be intentional about the way we speak to each other, the way we engage with each other in this learning community conversation. The words we use matter and they have power. We want to be using language that is respectful, inclusive, and welcoming to everyone in this particular learning community conversation. And we want to be aware of the fact that we want to be hopeful and affirming about the recovery process as we engage in this particular learning community conversation. Because it is a learning community conversation, what you have to say matters and has value. And what I talk about, what you talk about, the information you share, the perspective, the experience that you share may or may not necessarily reflect the views of our funders. And because this is a learning community conversation, that is welcome and acceptable and valued here. And I do have to add, and I want to be very transparent about this, that in order to receive any credit for this particular learning community conversation, you have to fully attend and participate in parts 1 and 2. I'm sorry, we can't offer partial credit for this learning community conversation. So again, I just want to be transparent about that and be very clear that you do need to be participating and present fully for both parts of the conversation in order to receive the full 6 credit hours. Samantha says, thank you for offering this training, so needed. Appreciate you saying this is for all who engage with escalated individuals. Sometimes these are not our clients, students, consumers. We get called on to deal with whomever is presenting as escalated. A very important point, Samantha. Often we just need to listen to the individual and they begin to de-escalate, proving anyone can do it. And you know, Samantha, thank you for adding that. And I want to underline something that Samantha is saying, because Samantha, I think there's great truth in what you just typed in the chat, in the sense that the heart of effective de-escalation, and I'm really intentionally framing it this way, and when I say heart, I mean the core or the rock or the foundation of effective de-escalation. And I know this may seem simplistic to say, and pardon me if it does seem that way. I don't mean to be simple in any way to offend, but part of effective de-escalation is skilled listening. Samantha's very right. It's skilled listening, because sometimes the escalated person, sometimes what they need most is to know that they've been heard. And skilled listening is a very powerful way to effectively communicate to somebody that they've been heard. And in communicating to somebody, and we're going to get into this in much greater detail, but communicating to somebody, and Samantha, thank you so much for really starting us off on a solid, meaningful foot. Skillfully communicating to somebody that they've been heard is a very different skill than offering information or educating somebody. It's a very, very different skill. So I just want to underline that. And again, I thank Samantha for really being willing to share that in writing in the chat. So thank you for that, Samantha. Because this is a learning community, we don't all have to agree. It's perfectly okay to have a different experience, to have different values, different beliefs. That is a richness that we can share with each other in our learning community. So the goal is respect. It's not necessarily agreement. So if you have a different point of view and you want to share it, you're welcome to do that. And my hope is that we won't interrupt each other. Again, I'm okay if you have something that you want to add and you want to unmute and add it. But let's say Wayne has the floor and is making a comment. Let's not interrupt him, and let's let people finish their point. And then if you want to add a point, feel free to unmute and follow them. So again, the goal is offering each other professional and mutual respect, whether we agree or disagree. It's perfectly okay. The goal is not necessarily agreement. The goal is respect and community exploration of this particular topic. And the last guideline that I would just ask everybody to consider is that we make I statements. I understand this information to be a fact or to be true. I believe this. I understand it this way, as opposed to, well, you know, every peer counselor, every KSAC, or every social worker. So if we could make I statements, that would really be great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Now, I want to touch briefly on the goal of this learning community conversation. And I'd like everybody to focus for just a moment on this first bullet, which is to normalize heightened affect feelings as part of the human interactions, in the health service environment. I'm very curious, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. Thanks, Guillermo. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. I'm just going to ask, would you, Hillary, I don't know if you're able to unmute, but if you're willing to, Hillary Mayer, if you're able to unmute, would you agree with that statement that it's probably pretty normal to expect that when patients or clients come to a social service environment, they may be experiencing heightened affect, meaning that their feelings may be raised. They may be feeling greater anxiety or fear or anger or whatever. Would you agree with that, Hillary? Would you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I would.
Okay, so that doesn't really, that makes sense that could be part of the landscape.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, so we know that Hillary agrees with that, and I'm wondering if you can use the chat. If you agree with that statement, if you agree with Hillary and I about that, you can type I agree 100% and use that cool icon if you want, or you can just type an A for agree. I wanted to put that right out on the table, and we have now about 81 people in the learning community. So 28 people, 30 people have responded right now. So if we can, I'd be very curious how many people agree with Hillary and I about that. So far, Hillary, we're up to 38. And the reason I wanted to put that on the table is because I wanted to normalize that like, that's just part of the landscape. I'm not judging it one way or the other. I just want us to start off by acknowledging that is particularly part of the social service landscape, meaning that, you know, we get to work in the morning, and chances are the people we're going to interact with throughout the course of that day, if we're seeing clients and patients or passing them in the hall, are going to be people who at some time during their time in the social service environment, those people that we're interacting with are all people who may be experiencing some sort of heightened affect. So that's the environment we're moving in. And Hillary, we're up to 49 people who kind of share our perspective in regard to that. And again, it's not about agreement, folks. If you don't agree, that's perfectly okay. And if you'd like the floor to comment on that, you're more than welcome to unmute and comment on that. But I just wanted to normalize the fact that that's what we, and I'm going to put it this way, that's what we face on a daily basis. That's what we face a moment at a time. And somebody put this in the chat, and I'm sorry, Will Marie put this in the chat, that's why we get burned out. And what I want to throw out for consideration is that the fact that we're surrounded by people and continuously interacting with people who might be in a state of heightened affect does have a huge impact on us. Yeah, Hillary, you agree with that. I see you nodding your head. It does have a huge impact on us, and it can, and doesn't have to, but can lead to burnout. And I'm thinking about some of the people that we had in the learning community conversation about self-care and wellness yesterday, it can also lead to physical symptoms, emotional symptoms, and it can lead to change of career or jobs. So I want to acknowledge the seriousness. Gary, I see you nodding. You also agree with that too, that it can have that impact. Is that a fair? Am I getting a good read on your nod, or were you nodding maybe to somebody else who was asking you a question? Gary's now, yes. Okay. All right. Good. Thank you, Gary. Okay. Good. Okay. I just wanted to check. Thank you. So I just want to normalize that. Yes, that is what we face. And trust me, my saying that is stating the painfully obvious that you probably know already. And I think it's an important acknowledgement to make. I'm going to share my screen again. And by all means, folks, if you have any comments or anything you want to add to that, don't hesitate to unmute and throw something out, or feel free to put something in the chat. The purpose or the goal of our two-part learning community conversation too is to have an opportunity to get a little bit of practice, but also to consider adopting ways of being. Because what I'd like to suggest is how we are. Wayne writes in the chat, if you don't take care of yourself, you may escalate a situation. You know something? We're going to come back to that in a moment. And I believe what Wayne said. And if I knew how to use that 100% icon, I would type that in the chat right now. Because I completely agree with the statement that Wayne just put in the chat. And if you haven't seen it, or if you didn't quite register as I read it, take a look at the chat and read what Wayne wrote and kind of assess for yourself whether you agree with that. Because we're all here to talk about and focus on de-escalation. And to Wayne's insightful point, we also can be the agents of escalation if we're not in a place of balance for ourselves. So my hope is that the goal of this learning community conversation, the fact that we're all in this together, all 82 of us are in this together, that we can talk about, we can focus on and identify ways of being, and also methods of communication that can possibly, and I have to acknowledge possibly, because it's not always possible to de-escalate a situation, but we can possibly preemptively keep something from escalating, and that we can responsively de-escalate a moment or a situation and actually reduce conflict or decrease it and promote collaboration. Now, a couple of people put things in the chat, so I want to take a moment to read them. Maynard writes, comorbidity is something that keeps me on top of my whole health and wellness. One thing can lead to another really quick. I love that, Maynard. And you know, as you wrote that and I read it, it really makes me think of like a domino effect, that how one thing can lead to another thing really quickly. And we want to make sure that we are managing what we need to manage. Lucy types absolutely. And Wayne also adds, if I'm tired, hungry, or angry, my responses may escalate a situation. Yes, and you know, Wayne, I'm going to disclose, and I hope you're okay with it. Wayne was a member of the learning community yesterday. And one of the things we talked about is the focus on a very sort of basic hungry, angry, lonely, tired, being able to assess where we are in regard to that. Are we hungry? Are we angry? Are we lonely? Or are we tired? And if that's the case, sometimes, and again, Wayne, you're making a very halt. Yes, Lyra. Wayne is making a really good connection to that. Depending on our state, we may actually escalate a situation. George writes, I agree on somewhat of a career. I agree on somewhat of a career change, having worked in a crisis and triage center, including the mobile crisis unit. It led me to want to work closer with the individual. I also believe that motivational interviewing should be a big part of de-escalating. Yeah, and George, thanks for adding that, because I want to link it to what, and I think it was Samantha who said this. And Samantha, if it wasn't you, and if it was somebody else, please remind me in the chat. But I want to acknowledge that motivational interviewing, the foundation of that is also skilled listening, in addition to other things. It's taking that skilled listening and putting it to work. But you'll remember that our colleague, and I think it was Samantha, said in the very beginning that truly de-escalation, sometimes people just want to be heard. And if you can effectively communicate to them that you've heard them, you're well on the road to de-escalating the situation. And I don't want you to fall into the trap of dismissing that as, okay, well, that's really simple. Actually, skilled listening, it really takes a lifetime of practice. Wayne, I see your hand. I'm just going to pause for a minute and read what people wrote in the chat, and then I'll invite you to unmute and make whatever comment you want to make. Araceli writes, this is a reason some people relapse while in treatment. It can be applied to other areas in life. Yes, active listening is my secret sauce. Yes, I love that, Samantha. I hope, I love your imagery there. And I'm going to say that active listening or skilled listening, hopefully, is my basic sauce. Kelly writes, halts, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sick, and stressed. Yeah, Wanda, building trust during the discussion is important. Yeah, I agree with Wanda 100%. And again, one of the ways I think that we can build trust in the process of de-escalation is by communicating to somebody that we're listening to them. Wayne, I see that your hand is raised, so please go ahead. Go ahead and unmute and make your comment.
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Yes, for me, I would be the tool, and I only can control myself. I couldn't control anyone else. If someone is, so I can't control them, but I can control my response to them. So that's what I feel is important. And also, maybe jumping, but tone and inflection, has a lot to do with it, tone, inflection, body language. Someone shared yesterday about when a supervisor, was trying to be intimidating and,
Yes.
The distance that you're near somebody, all of these things are very, very important, and so I just said these de-escalation, this is so important. And I think, like you said, everyone could really benefit from it. And, I think we wouldn't have as many police shootings if people learn de-escalation. Some people take things to another level that doesn't have to be, because like you said, sometimes we want to be heard. I know I don't like when I'm not heard, so I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Wayne. Thanks. And Shannon agrees with you, Wayne, and she's clapping. In the chat, she's clapping. And I want to underline something that Wayne said, because he framed it as, well, maybe I'm jumping ahead. And actually, I don't think you are jumping ahead, Wayne, in the sense that I think the thing that we need to consider is many of the things, in addition to skilled listening. And I love the fact that Wayne made an I statement and said, I don't like it when I'm not listened to. Because let's face it, folks, how do you feel when you're not listened to? It might raise your affect. I see Hillary nodding her head. It may raise your affect. So yeah, listening and being understood. Yes, because you can tell if somebody really is trying to understand you or not. And again, I want to underline that all of the things that Wayne mentioned, And I really want to frame it this way. Just like skilled listening, all of the things that Wayne mentioned are de-escalation tools at your disposal. I'm going to repeat that because I agree 100% with what Wayne said. All of the things that he mentioned, tone of voice, physical proximity, gestures, all of those things are de-escalation tools at your disposal. Now I'm going to add an if here. And the if is important. If you're in a place to be able to access those tools in the moment that you're in. And again, I want you to really think about that, because it's possible that you may be responding in a way where you're not in control of the tone of your voice, where you're not in control of your physical proximity. And as the provider, those are tools at your disposal. And if you're not in control of them, the next step is that you are potentially moving toward escalating a situation as opposed to de-escalating a situation. So I'm going to just quickly check the chat. A couple of other things came in. I think de-escalation being heard is very important in many ways. Then one, not only does it benefit us in the career path, absolutely true, but also at home, absolutely, and especially with children. More than half of the time that people portray negative behaviors, it's because they feel as if they are not heard or being listened to. Yeah, wow, beautifully said. Katie, or beautifully written. Katie says, use your exit tool if you can't access the tools Wayne mentioned. Katie, would you please say a little bit, if you're able to unmute, would you please say a little bit about your exit tool? And then I see Wayne has raised his hand again. We'll give him an opportunity to comment. But Katie, if you're able to unmute and you'd like to say a little bit about the exit tool, I've never quite heard it put that way, and I really like it. So go ahead, Katie.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you just great.
At our health center, we also talk about recognizing that there are times when we're just not able to stay in an escalated situation because it's activating us too much. And so we encourage our staff to recognize that, and exit can be asking a coworker to come and take over so that you can leave. Or it might just, like, sometimes you don't have a coworker available to you. So it might be saying, you know what, I need to step away for a minute. I'm going to see if I can, like, you may or may not have the words in the moment, but just to be able to say, it's okay to say, I need to step away from this for a minute and I'll be back. And just give a pause, or again, try to find like a supervisor or somebody else that can step in to take over in your place. So just practicing those exits is another tool that's important to have available. And it gives confidence for some of our staff that are not confronted with escalated situations a lot.
Katie, can I ask you a quick follow-up question? I promise it'll be quick.
Sure.
Okay. So I just want to confirm that I heard you correctly, which is that you said you and your colleagues discussed talking about using this exit tool / strategy, and that the use of this actually helps people to feel more confident.
Knowing that it's okay to exit gives them more confidence.
Fantastic. And that you do actually talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Katie, before we go to Wayne, you really prompt me to want to do a poll of everybody in our learning community today, because we have 80 people in our learning community today. Now, of all 80 of us who are here together today, how many of you have had the experience that Katie and her colleagues have, where you've actually talked about, normalized, and accepted that it's okay to say, you know what, let's take a pause for a minute. I'm going to step away. So how many of you have actually talked about that strategy with your colleagues like Katie just described? And if you have, type a Y in the chat. And if you have not, type an N in the chat. So Katie, I don't know if you're seeing this, but a number of people are typing Y, but I have to be honest and acknowledge that a number of people are also acknowledging no, that this is not a strategy that they've overtly talked about. And I want to underline two things. Katie, thank you so much. I want to underline two things that Katie's bringing to this learning community. One, hey, there's this strategy. Somebody just typed, Katie, I don't know if you saw this, but somebody just typed in never, that they've never discussed this. So A, Katie is sharing the strategy, and B, Katie is also modeling for us that colleagues can talk about and normalize and accept this as a strategy. So Katie, thank you so much. Wayne, the floor is yours. And then we're gonna look at some of the things that people put in the chat. Floor is yours.
Yeah, what I'm here talking about is, to me, talking about safety, basically safety. I mean, some of these things for me is life skills, so potentially when I know I'm in a situation that may escalate, because I have to be able to read someone's body language, you know what I'm saying? So that's important, because it's not so always what someone says out of them, so you have to just kind of like watch them, and from life skill, I know when someone may be getting ready to square off or at me or whatever, and how I need to respond to that. So I just believe a lot of this de-escalation, it's safety, because we are in situations where people have mental health issues and poor impulse control or whatever have you. And so I really have to learn how to read people. I've never ever put myself in a situation, because I guess I've been pretty good at like kind of being able to quell people down. I never even get to that point, because like you said, just being heard. But I think it's very important to be able to, you got to watch and you got to read, people. So that's all I wanted to share.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Wayne. And Wayne prompts me to want to share a gesture with you based on kind of what Katie is suggesting, which is this. I'm stretching my arms out as wide as I can. And to me, what this gesture communicates is continuum. Because sometimes we may use our exit tool, and it's not necessarily about safety. It's about that we realize that we're getting activated and we need to have a moment of pause so that this can remain a productive conversation. So that's on a different place on the continuum. There may also be times when we need to use the exit tool when it is actually in that moment about keeping everybody safe. Us, the participant, all of it. So I want you to be thinking about too, the continuum, and I'll link it to one of the things that Wayne said as well, which is the idea that sometimes it never gets to the need for quote unquote de-escalation, because you are able to employ communicating to the person that they've been heard, calming the situation down with your tone of voice and how rapidly or slowly you're speaking, where you're able to pull it back. So that's on another place on the continuum. So I just want you to be thinking about continuum as well. Okay. So a number of people have put things in the chat. I'm going to quickly check those things in the chat. Amanda writes, we also talk about not even responding to a crisis situation if you're not in the condition to do so effectively. Don't respond if you might make the situation worse. And again, that's going to require some awareness. George writes, the person in escalation may have some problem with the individual doing the de-escalation, re-traumatization, etc. Yep, Lucy writes, we have not discussed it, but just yesterday when the yelling began, my colleagues came out and made me feel supported. Fantastic. That's good to know, Lucy. George writes, ask if they would rather speak with someone else. Hillary mentions, I did this earlier today. And Samantha adds, that seems like an amazing strategy, and talking about it in advance seems like a good way to avoid frustration and burnout within the team. No one would become the sole client whisperer for the entire program. My thought is giving permission to exit will allow the exit of resignation down the road. So glad to be in this training today. Lauren writes, I agree 100% with that. Once we started adding more supports in place at my agency, we had a lower resignation rate due to burnout. I just read what Lauren wrote. So if you didn't get a chance to read that, please do. I'm going to jump back for a minute to something that Samantha wrote, because I want to underline something, and it's relevant to where we're moving to in a moment, which is Samantha wrote, that seems like an amazing strategy, and talking about it in advance seems like a good way, and she goes on to say other things. And talking about it in advance, I want to underline that. I want to underline the fact that identifying these strategies, being in this learning community, talking about it with your colleagues in advance can be a very powerful way. Yes, George, and also being able to do that self-check in advance can be a very powerful way to move forward. So Wayne, I see that your hand is raised. I'm not sure if it was from before or if there's something else you wanted to add.
Yeah, no, and just kind of piggybacking on what was just said.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know for myself, sometimes intellectually I know something, so I may know it, but now to actually execute it, you know, in the situation, because I might be in a situation where somebody pushes my button. So like I said, it's very important for me to have to learn how to quell the situation, because it gets to a point of no return that I don't care what you do, that is not going to turn around. So you don't never want to get them till they locked and loaded and that's it. Because it's not going to end well. So that's the whole thing. Never try not to allow it to get to that point and recognize that.
Correct. And that's the whole point of de-escalation, is trying to avoid that point of no return, avoiding what potentially turns into a really problematic situation for everybody. And again, I want to underline something that Wayne shared, which is, you know, I might interact with somebody that my buttons are pushed. I'm going to make a statement here. And if you agree with this statement, type an A in the chat. And if you disagree with this statement, type a D in the chat. But I want to make this statement. And before I make it, though, I'm going to look at what Susan Beth and Hillary wrote in the chat. Susan Beth wrote, being able to ask for support should be able to precipitate it, knowing that there could potentially be a challenge that may arise in needing support and permission to exit. Yes. At my agency, we have a messenger on our computers, so we are able to contact each other. Excellent. Now, I see that a couple of other people are already agreeing. I haven't made the statement yet, so let me make the statement. And then I know you were just testing your agreement button, but that's okay. So let me make the statement, or maybe you were agreeing with the statements I was reading, but let me make this statement, and then you can tell me if you agree or disagree with it, which is, we have 79 people in this learning community. I'm gonna throw out, and again, if you agree, type an A, if you disagree, type a D. All 79 of us in this learning community have buttons that can potentially be pushed. All 79 people in this learning community conversation have buttons that can potentially be pushed. So I just am throwing that out there. You can either agree or disagree. So A for agree, D for disagree. 33 people have responded. And I have to tell you, I'm watching the chat fairly closely. And you know what Katie writes? Even superheroes have buttons. Thank you, Katie. And I'm sure there are many superheroes amongst us. Cordelia writes, absolutely. Excellent. So again, folks, the people that wrote D, how? I'm not sure if I understand that. But right, how do you not have buttons? Yeah, Jason writes possibly, yes. So the reason I mention that, folks, is that we're all human beings. We all come to our jobs, to our lives with our history, our experience, some of it that we're aware of, some of it that we're not aware of. There is the unconscious. There are triggers for everyone, and trauma happens to everyone. Absolutely. So I just want to normalize the reality of that for all of us. Yes, go ahead, Cordelia. I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Good morning to you. You can call me Goldie.
Okay, Goldie.
The one thing, I'm a retired special education teacher.
Yeah.
And I'm going into the second phase of my career as in the mental health field. And when I first started out in teaching, I taught at-risk students academically and behavior, and on the special ed end, emotionally and behaviorally disordered, right?
Okay. Yeah. So you probably had no use at all for de-escalation skills.
How about that? And but you know, and I was a young teacher, right? And
younger than you are now.
Yes, oh, most definitely, most definitely.
All right. Okay.
And what I had to understand, and it took me a few years, don't take it personally. And I used to take everything like, oh my God, how could you call me a bitch? Oh my God, how could you throw a chair at me? Oh my, you know, and I'm like, yo, it's not about you, it's about what's going on with them. And it's probably something that happened before they even got to school. So it really, and I appreciate this training, because now that you know, I'm in this phase, and just this morning we had to use some de-escalation strategies, if you will. And one of the things that I had to understand is that you can't talk at the same height that your client or your student is in. And I'm really cognizant of that because I have a deep voice. And as soon as I talk, you know, so I've had to learn. So I thank you, and I appreciate, I'm glad I have the opportunity, because I can take this learning, these strategies, and now internalize them in the new position that I'm in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Goldie. And you know, I do want to underline, and I love the way first of all, thank you for following the guideline of making I statements. You talked about you and your experience, so thank you, because that's what's really rich in our learning community. That's the gift of being in a learning community. So thank you for that. The other thing I want to underline, and I really heard you say this because this has been my experience too. Believe it or not, I wasn't even 30 when I began my social service career. And I also had the experience that Goldie identified, which is like, if somebody was upset or they were angry, somehow that was my fault. And I couldn't, it was very hard for me at the beginning to acknowledge that, you know what, hey, this person was upset before they got here. I didn't necessarily make them upset. And I love, Goldie, that you said and you owned that it took you a couple of years to kind of own, to figure that out, like, hey, it ain't personal. Now, don't misunderstand me. It doesn't mean that I'm not the person who had to duck the chair flying through the air.
Right.
Right. We had to duck that chair. But to Goldie's insightful, hard-earned wisdom, there are tools that we can use, A, not to take it personally,
Yes.
B, not to do it alone, and C, how to use the tools we have, not speaking at the same pace as the student or the client, lowering our voice to help
Yes.
chill the situation out. And again, Goldie, we don't often get an opportunity to be in a community like this, to talk and share those experiences and then use them to refine what we're going to do going forward.
It only took me 30 years and then I retired. So yeah.
Excellent. And my hope is that there are people here that are, you know, earlier on in their careers, that they will also draw from this, and everybody will be able to draw from it, because it's reintroducing us, it's raising our awareness again back to these particular things. I'm just going to quickly check the chat, and then I see Wayne has raised his hand. We'll give him the floor, but I just want to check the chat because people have mentioned some resources. Ashley, well, Catherine says, thank you, Goldie. And Ashley says, yes, I can relate. It takes some time for me to realize it's not about me. Lyra writes, I'm not hearing too clearly. Okay, if you need to do that, Lyra, feel free to sign back on. Katie writes, what has helped you to realize that it's not, I guess Katie is asking you a question, Goldie. What has helped you to realize it's not personal? And how can supervisors, coworkers support staff after an incident when the staff is taking it personally? Wow, Katie, that is a very powerful question. I'm going to just read the other things that people put in the chat. We're going to go to Wayne, and then I want to go back to what Katie said, because Katie, that's really powerful.
Yeah.
And maybe Goldie has some thought about that.
Yeah.
Will Marie says, for Noelle, it's a language thing. I do not like to say that I have buttons that someone can push. I activate those emotions. Yes, it's a reaction. Understood, Will Marie. And buttons is kind of a shorthand. And I respect you're framing it in the language that works for you. Oh, good to know, Lyra. Jason has put a YouTube in and says, great TED Talk on topic of how not to take things personally. And Jason, thank you so much for sharing that. I just want to urge our learning community, please do not exit to watch the video that Jason has shared with you at this particular moment. But maybe at the conclusion of the day, Jason will put the link in the chat again, and then you can watch it. And if you did exit to watch it, please come back. Susan Beth writes, I personally found that creating boundaries early worked best. However, still being empathic and showing compassion. Brittany writes, I work as a case manager, family partner, and I have found often it relates to being let down by other agencies, and they feel I can do nothing more for them. So they are angry and upset about prior experiences. This actually helps me to be more motivated in finding them the right services to advocate for them. I have a son with autism that has helped to teach me patience and understanding way beyond what I ever had. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you for sharing that with us. Cheyenne writes, it's hard not to take things personally or respond appropriately when your self-care is lacking. Very true. When you're hungry, tired, burnt out. self-care trainings. Yes, George, agreed. So we're going to go to Wayne, then we're going to come back to let Goldie respond to the question, and then we'll entertain Katie's further question of how can supervisors, coworkers support staff after an incident when that staff person is taking it personally? I love that question for two reasons. One, because sometimes we can fall into taking things personally and it has a toll, it causes a reaction in us, and that staff and coworkers can partner with us to help us move through that. So I'm gonna give Wayne the floor. We're gonna go to Goldie, and then I see Jason, you've also raised your hand too. So we want to make sure we hear from everybody. Go ahead, Wayne, the floor is yours.
You know, the L in Halt, the lonely, for me, that means I don't have to do this by myself. You know,
Yeah.
That's why we have, you know, the multidisciplinary team, or you talk to other people of people in your field, you know. But for myself, I always have to realize that first, I'm human. You know, I have buttons, I have triggers, and the bottom line is some people I just don't like. Whatever reason, I don't like them, you know, and I, as a professional, I try not to exude that, you know, but sometimes I gotta be cognizant of that so my reaction doesn't come across like that.
Yeah.
But there are clients, patients that whatever reason I don't like. And so it's important for me to not understand that so I don't escalate a situation, you know, because it could be the same situation I have with someone else and I might not play it out the same way.
Right. And we don't want to act that out, because your point's well taken, Wayne, that can escalate the situation. So Goldie, after your many years of experience,
30.
yeah, your 30 years of experience, what is your take on how you've learned not to take it personally?
Well, you know what? As I stated, it took a lot of years, right? And I taught in a very small school district. Our town is only 1.3 square miles, right? So building relationships, you know, and it might be difficult for other people because I don't know what type of environment that they work in, obviously.
Yeah.
But I had come to find, and being on for the last 9 years of my career, I was on the high school level. So little did they know that I had taught their mothers, their fathers, their older aunts, uncles, some of their cousins, some of their other siblings, so forth and so on. So when they got to getting crazy and throwing stuff and doing all of that, I'm like, oh, I would pull out my cell phone and I'm like, oh, whose number is this? Oh, Miss Golden, Miss Golden. And I said, listen here. I said, you know, and so I found that just having that intimate connection with them, and I could show some compassion, some empathy. I know where they came from. I know where what their parents went through, their grandparents went through. So building that connection with them and having that influence, but I had to make sure that I used that influence on a positive level, that
Yes.
I didn't hang it over their head and said, if you do this one more time, that I used it in a positive way.
Right.
And for most of the times, all they do is pull out that cell phone, scroll down that list. Oh, whose number is this? What you doing with my mother? I said, I touched your mother 30 years ago. She was in my, yo, let's FaceTime her. And so, just the mere fact that they knew I had that type of influence with their parents.
Yeah.
So it's all about building relationships.
Yes.
And even today at my new job, I drove the van for the first time today. So I had to drive the ladies to their program this morning, right? So, I had the opportunity to talk with some of them. I said, listen, because they wanted me to come back with and to take them out this weekend. So I said, well, I don't work on the weekends, but if you would like for me to do that, some of your behaviors And they were like, oh, we're sorry, Goldie. And I said, it's not that I'm upset with you. It's that I want you to be in a positive environment. And there is a way to express that.
Yes. Yes.
And so, you just, and for a long time, I was just all in myself. I was like, oh my God, how could they do that to me? How could they say that? And I'm like, girl, so you've got to show some compassion and you've got to show some empathy and some sympathy as well. So, you just really have to be in tune with yourself. And, even though I think sometimes I'm Goldie the Great has fallen off sometimes, but I chose to put myself in there because I say all the time, only by the grace of God, there go I.
Yes. Yep.
So I hope I didn't offend anybody, but that's just the way only by the grace of God, there go I.
Yes.
So I would hope that someone would take the time and also not to demean what they're going through, that they have value in how they feel.
Yep.
But let's look at another way that we can express those feelings so that we can get you to a more positive outcome.
Yeah. And to your many points, Goldie, one thing I think that's important to underline too is that there are times, folks, when we are in the process of de-escalating, that we are modeling for this person that there is another way to express your feelings. And the sheer fact that we're doing it and they pick up on that can help to de-escalate the situation too. And I really want to underline what Goldie was saying about doing everything we can to make sure we're not demeaning the person or disrespecting them, even if they're throwing chairs across the room. And don't misunderstand me, folks. No one in this learning community conversation is a punching bag. No one in this learning community conversation should fear for their safety. And people's bad behavior is not something that you have to tolerate. And there is a way to set those boundaries. There is a way to model alternatives to chair throwing. There is a way to model alternatives to cursing somebody out. So just keeping those things in mind. I'm going to give Jason the floor. We're going to go back to the question that was asked about how coworkers can support each other. If someone's taking it personally, I want us to touch on that. And then I see that Wayne and Lyra both want to add something. So we'll open it up to Jason, and then we're going to go back to the question, talk about that as a large group, and then we'll come to Wayne and to Lyra. Go ahead, Jason.
So I can give you an example of like I said, I put that YouTube in the video, and it kind of helped step me through that, right? So I worked in an addiction treatment facility. And as when you're facilitating any group, there's crosstalk. If you've been a teacher, there's all that disruption, right? But when I watched this video, it stepped me through. It's like, I had to be mindful of, here they are going through detox, now they're feeling things in a sober feeling. So there's a lot going on in their body, right? So that's a little bit of the reason why they're talking. So it helped me understand, but I still was taking it personally. So it forced me to examine myself a little bit deeper, reflect inward, right? And that's when I came across, I'm insecure. So when they're talking, sidebarring, I feel they're talking about me. I feel like they're snickering about me. Mm-hmm. And so that's something I had to work on. So, when you look at taking it personally, some of it's going to be about them, but you got to reflect on yourself and how much of it is about you. And that's what this gentleman in like 17 minutes helped me understand and pointed out what I needed to work on. That's why I encourage anybody that does this kind of work to definitely watch that, because you're going to be in those situations. Is it about them at that time? Or it could be about you, it could be about you. Thank you for the floor.
Yeah, of course, Jason, thank you. And to Jason's offering, I'm gonna suggest that maybe what we do, because I know you haven't watched the video yet, what I'm gonna suggest that we do is that in between when we see each other next, since Jason has been so kind as to share this particular resource with us, what I'm going to suggest that we do is, because I don't believe I've seen the video that Jason has shared with us either. So what I'm going to suggest that we do is that we all watch this video in between until we see each other next, and then let's see what we make of it. We can discuss it as a learning community. Okay, since Jason has been so kind as to share it with us, and it may resonate for some of us, it may not resonate for some of us, but let's let that be the beginning of our conversation for part 2. Okay, so don't watch it now, watch it in between, and then we will start our learning community conversation part 2 with that as kind of the framework, as a point for us to reflect as a learning community. Now, before we go to Lyra and before we go to Wayne, I'm just going to quickly check the chat. And Jason is apologizing in the chat for the homework. And Jason, I'm going to frame it, and this is the power of language. It is a learning community growth opportunity that people are free to take advantage of or not as they decide to. So hopefully that lets Jason off the hook of homework. Samantha writes, I would be interested to hear the best de-escalation response for chair throwing besides getting weighted chairs or nailing the chairs to the floor. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Samantha. We may come to that at some point. I really don't want to get where I can model for supporting my coworkers, because I hate when my coworkers who have better self-control than I think I have react to our personal served, to our person served. I really want to get to where I can model for supporting my coworkers, because I hate when my coworkers who have better self-control than I'm not sure if I understand what you're typing there, Catherine. I'm trying, but maybe you can unmute and elaborate. Excellent. And folks are thanking you for the video, Jason. So Catherine, I don't know if you can if you can elaborate on that, if you can unmute and elaborate, or if you
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Catherine, please.
Okay, I don't feel I have that much self-control. Like, I feel some of my coworkers have better self-control.
Yeah.
And they react sometimes to some of our person serves, meaning the clients and stuff.
Yeah.
Unnecessary, you know. Then you could clearly see that these people have histories.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't write
No. Thank you.
Catherine, you know what? When I first started teaching, I had just found out I was pregnant with my first child, right? So I was coming in the middle of a school year. I was the 7th teacher in this class of 30 at-risk kids. They had run away 6 folk. Some folk came to the class, started the day, and by lunch, they left, said, I'm not staying. So I had just found out I was pregnant. I was teaching 30 kids in at-risk class, right? They had a lot going on. And I used to come home, honest to goodness, and I would cry every day. I would cry every day. And my husband told me, don't you come home another day crying. He said, it's either you go man up or go get another job. And I decided, I'm like, this baby needs health care. I need a pension. And so I had to work on me.
Yeah.
I mean, people can give you suggestions and, you can watch, but until you decide of how you're going to approach things, It doesn't matter. Even with this, as wonderful as this, and I know we're just only an hour into it, you've got to be willing to and work on it, Catherine. You've got to work on it. And at some juncture, it'll come to you. And guess what? Your clients, or I can only take me, for example, my kids, like, okay, you know, if you throw one more chair and if you break something, you know, your parents are going to have to pay for it, right? And knowing that they knew, it's like, you know, I live in the projects, I'm on this, I'm on that. And so when they took ownership of it, then we could have a dialogue. But Catherine, it's just something that you're gonna have to work on, ma'am.
It's a life process.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I want to underline something that Goldie shared with us, which is that, and Goldie, I agree with you 100%. And this is related to maybe not taking things personally. And I love the way you put this in what you said, Goldie, which is that if we can go into the situation, whatever the situation is, if we can go into the situation acknowledging with the reality of that these folks have a lot going on.
Got a lot going on.
Some of it we may know and understand, and some of it we may not have a clue, but they have a lot going on. And if we can have compassion around the fact that they have a lot going on, and again, that's not an excuse for bad behavior.
It's not.
But having the compassion for the reality of that they have a lot going on is a way that we can respond to them very differently.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So before we get to going back to the question that was asked about how we can support people, I'm going to give Lyra, Will Marie, and then Wayne an opportunity to comment or say or react to what they may want to react to. And then we're going to come back to that question that I'd like us all to entertain as a large group briefly. So Lyra, the floor is yours, and then we're going to go to Will Marie, and then we'll go to Wayne.
Thank you. Good morning. I want to just share an opinion and hear response with regards to de-escalating a situation. I know that we've talked about using various tools, and I'm wondering if a tool may be what is absolutely nothing. And I'm going to share a case with a young child that I was working with who had a frequent of angry outburst. And it would escalate. In this particular time, I saw it coming. The warning signs. And so I separated him from the group before it escalated to the full extent of where he would throw chairs or start to destroy like objects, knocking things off the table. I put him in, he and I went into an area where he could have the space, and I sat back and allowed him to release whatever it was. So he knocked the things off the desk and, and did whatever it was that he needed to get out. After he finished, he sighed, a sigh of relief. And I said to him, I said, "Are you finished?" And he said, "Yes, I'm finished." And I said, "Okay, so now it's time to clean it up." And he said, "I'm not cleaning up blank." So I was silent, thinking that I'm sure he already had a response to a negative response. So I allowed my eyes to water, and he looked at me, and you could see the child return. And he said, "Miss Terry, you're crying?" He said, "I made you cry?" He said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll clean it up. I'll clean it all up." And he proceeded to begin to pick up the paper and the trying to fix the things that he had destroyed or just threw things. Now, I guess my question raised is that a potential way or a possible way of handling a situation if the opportunity allows? Because of course, in an environment where there's a lot of people, we may not want to do that because of safety concerns. I did not feel threatened with being him in a room by myself. And I believe that he needed to get past that moment of rage or that moment of frustration. And it wasn't geared at me or himself. It really was geared at being the target of constant abuse and ridicule and bullied.
Yeah. So Lyra, I think in some ways you've answered your own question, because clearly what you describe is a strategy that was individualized and very insightful based on the relationship that you had with this young person. And it clearly worked out because the person was able to express themselves, not harm anybody else or themselves. And they even expressed empathy toward you because they saw that it had an impact, on you. And there are a couple of things I want to underline in terms of what you shared, which I think are transferable as we, as a learning community, consider the process of de-escalation. One, sometimes we have the opportunity, and Goldie alluded to this earlier, sometimes we have the opportunity to know our patients or our clients fairly well. So we may know the warning signs of when they are about to escalate. And Lyra's beautiful and really very touching scenario, Lyra, thank you for sharing it from your own experience, was that she knew that something was about to happen with this young person. And she very appropriately, because she did not feel unsafe or at risk, she was able to appropriately isolate him and provide an opportunity for him to express his emotions. And part of the way he expressed them was through physicality. And again, Lyra made a decision to take him into a space where that was appropriate.
Also, Paul, I just want to add that when he said, oh, you're crying, Miss Terry, I made you cry, my response to him was, my eyes are watered, I'll call him Jay. My eyes have watered, Jay, because I'm hurt. Because when I see someone hurting or hurting themselves, it hurt me. And right now I see that you're hurting.
Yeah. And again, another beautiful example of expressing empathy for what, and again, the thing I want to underline here, folks, there's no magic formula for de-escalation. No two de-escalations are ever the same. I love Lyra's scenario, and Lyra, again, thank you so much for sharing it. I love Lyra's scenario because it's so unique to that individual, to her in that moment with the individual. And yet, even though it's unique, it's based on sound use of skills. One, paying attention to the warning signs. Two, making a decision about how to keep everybody safe. Three, communicating to the person that you hear them. You're trying to understand their situation. And three, maintaining that the person has value, even though they've expressed being angry and upset. And again, it's a powerful example of how you can employ all those different things.
Mr. Paul, before
Yes.
you go on, and then I promise I'll stop.
Go ahead.
When was it Lyra? When she, and you just alluded to being able to recognize after we came back fully in person after
Yes.
the pandemic, when we went back to school, we were mandated to have social emotional learning activities every day.
Yeah.
And then every other month, each grade level, that's all we focused on for the whole entire day. So our building administration, it was mandated that we had to stand at our doors during the change of every class. And before a student could enter into the room, we had to take the pulse of on a scale of 1 to 3, 1 being great and 3 being whatever. What's your number today? All right. And then after we got everybody in, we did another check. And at the end of the block, we did another check because we wanted to keep them positive. We wanted to keep them whole when we sent them on to the next teacher. So being that in the facility that I'm working, the sober living house that I'm working in now, I find that, and I'm dealing with grown women. All right. So I have to make it appropriate for the age. So when I'm doing my meds, we're talking, and I ask them because I do overnight. So when I'm talking to them, it's like, oh, how was, last night? What did you do? And, how are you feeling this morning? Any questions? Do you have any comments? Do you have any concerns?
Yep.
This is your opportunity to talk one-on-one with me.
Yep.
And if you would like for me to take any notes, and they've come to, and I missed because we were running behind today. And one of the clients said to me, she said, Goldie, you didn't ask me if I had any questions, comments, or concerns. And I was like, well, girl, do you? Because we run it late. And she laughed. But she was like, no, I'm good. So you have to get the pulse of your clients, of your students, or whomever,
Yes. You have to get the pulse of the moment.
Absolutely.
Especially in the situation where you may be de-escalating. You have to get the pulse of the moment. And Goldie, I love that story because clearly these folks like having their pulse taken, and they missed it when their pulse wasn't being taken.
Yes.
Because let's face it, folks, if Katie says to me, so Paul, how are you doing today? Do you have any questions? Do you have any concerns? What Katie is expressing to me is that she cares. She's expressing to me that she sees me, and she expresses to me that she's willing to hear me.
That's right. And you know what? And even though we were running a few minutes late, I still have to, and she was like, no, Goldie, I'm good. And I said, no. I said, no, I said, we can take a few minutes if there's something that, and it was something minor, but I have to be mindful that she wanted to alert me to something. Yes. And I'm like, I'll take care of it for you. So, if we're going to start them on that, we can't deny them the opportunity that we have created for them.
Yes, you're talking about consistency.
Absolutely.
Reliability.
Absolutely.
Both of which, folks, and I'm telling you something both of which build trust. Consistency and reliability. Will Marie, thank you so much for your patience. And then we're going to go to Wayne as well. So go ahead, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I just want to say thank you to Lyra and Goldie and you, Mr. Warren, for the powerful stories. So Lyra, your question was, is there any moment where you want to de-escalate, where your intervention is nothing? So as Mr. Warren clearly explained, that was not a nothing intervention. That was very calculated. And so maybe to you, it comes natural. So for you, Goldie and Lyra, thank you for doing what you do. And you provided for this individual a moment of healing, because you provided that safe space, and you gave this individual also the moment of you embodied what he needed also, so allowed healing. So that's why he would react to you. So every time, hopefully that continued happening, it would, normalize things more and more for him. So, you think that maybe the reactions that he probably had after he destroyed something was even more negative. So you allowing him to just de-escalate and do that and have that reaction, you are assisting, in healing. Thank you for that. And I just wanted to go back because I was asked like how, you don't have any buttons. Well, I don't physically have buttons. I do have triggers like we all do. And
Right.
and the
Right.
and the reason that I don't like to say I have buttons is because I am teaching that skill to some of the kids that I work with, so that they can, and thank you, Goldie, for saying mindful, bring mindfulness of what is yours and what is not.
Right.
So I think it's just like a balance of you understanding that this person is coming with their own story and you have your own story. So just creating that space, like taking the pulse. I had to take the pulse of myself to be able to be there for them.
Mhm.
So that's an ongoing, every day, every moment of the day, thing that I have to do for myself. So I try to teach my people, my clients, my students, that we do not have buttons. I mean, we will react to certain things, but because I think that when you allow somebody to say you're pushing my buttons, you're just giving them the power of them doing something to you. So to me, when I say that I don't, it's just like I am, or maybe I do, but it's like I press them myself. I don't allow somebody else to press them. So
Right.
that's
Right.
that's
Right. Yes. And I love the distinction you're making, because what you're doing is you're taking ownership for your triggers.
correct.
And that distinction is so rich, because buttons does imply somebody else is pushing them, and
Right.
triggers implies, you know what, my story, my history is activated because of what's happening in the moment. And that is different. And thank you for sharing that distinction,
Yeah.
because the way I would rephrase and will rephrase my question going forward, my statement is that as human beings, we all have triggers.
Yeah.
And that is a more precise and more owned way of, so I really appreciate that distinction. Thank you for walking us through that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do have buttons, but I just don't allow somebody else to push them. So
Right.
if you will, and I think the other question or statement, or both in one, is that, it's a fine line when you're in a situation that you potentially have to de-escalate and not have your triggers come out, or managing them, because they will be coming out. How do you think of your safety, and what are you going to allow this client to do, or this person, to safe keep yourself, right? Versus allowing them to help them de-escalate. So how do we do that? There's a fine line between what you're going to accept, for them to do if they are, not being respectful to you, and that's not about you, but are you going to allow that because you're also modeling the behavior? So,
Right.
a fine line, and how do we do that? I'm being triggered, or I'm not being respected,
Right.
or I'm not safe.
Right.
So.
Right. And you really do underline two very specific considerations. Consideration number one is self-awareness, in the sense that you can be in any given moment with a client or a participant or whatever, and you must be monitoring, like, are my triggers being activated here? And if my triggers are being activated, how am I managing them? So there's that. And then there's the other piece of it, which is that continuous self-monitoring as this moment progresses or goes forward with this person. How am I doing? Am I acting out of my trigger or am I managing my trigger? Is this productive going forward, or do we need to call other people into this?
Correct.
So I really appreciate your digging deep into this, because that self-awareness of one's own triggers and their activation, their management, and then that continuous ability to assess yourself in a moment-by-moment basis. And you're doing that at the same time you're trying to understand this person. You're being very clear about your tone of voice and this way you're speaking. And the thing I want to underline in terms of that is that takes practice. It's not natural. What's natural is you're triggered and you react. And that doesn't help. That can actually escalate the situation. So the process of de-escalation is a learned, practiced, reflected upon, and refined process. It's not natural. Now, you may have done it so much and you may be so skilled at it that it feels second nature to you. But I'll go back to Lyra's beautiful example. She did a lot, which she kind of maybe saw as nothing. But that was a very skilled interaction that had multiple levels of intervention in it. So again, that self-awareness and the willingness to keep checking with self as the moment is progressing as part of the process. It's not the whole thing, it's part of it though. We're going to go to Wayne and then we'll make, I'll make a couple of other statements and then we'll go forward. Go ahead, Wayne, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, for all the comments. When I was, when you started, you talked about language, how language is important. And also, as a social worker, as a counselor, I learned how to, I try to talk in a strength-based language, So just anyway, and so I'm listening to about triggers and buttons, and so yeah, if I was teaching some adolescents or some kids, maybe I would like label them definitely. Thank you. Those are triggers, because maybe more than the strength base. That's triggers. But then I'm gonna play the devil advocate on this now. I shared with me that these were my buttons being pushed. Okay, so imagine if I told somebody, I said, no, those are not buttons, those are triggers, like that. So then all of a sudden, I feel like I'm not being heard. You're going to tell me what they are. So like I said, so that could escalate a situation because now that person may not be feeling heard. But anyway, so like I said, we could be talking semantics, but like I said, to talk in a strength-based language, triggers is probably a better term. But anyway, I just also heard here that we don't treat this like, I believe not with one swooping brush, that each population that I believe we have to treat different. If someone has mental health issues, you're going to treat them different. If they're adolescents, you're going to treat them different. Maybe if they're early adolescents, somebody told the kid maybe 5 or 6 years old, you're going to treat them different. They're substance abusers, all of these things. So I don't think that we can treat people with this broad brush. And so I think that we have to have a lot of different tools in the box. We got to have a regular screwdriver, a Phillips screwdriver, some kind of wrench, whatever. Because to be poor, we have one tool. But the other thing that someone brought to my attention, which I always use, because I worked a lot with substance abusers, and I think there's also, and the other thing I want to say about respect. I think if you treat people with respect, you'll go a long way. Because a lot of times, especially with adolescents, they, one of the biggest things that they get in these beats with because they felt disrespected. You know what I'm saying? So you don't want to disrespect anybody, because once somebody's real disrespect, you may have lost them. And the other thing is that I found that also with adolescents, substance abusers, and probably even with whatever, is somebody said to isolate them. For me, I always find it important to isolate them. They're having a problem, whatever, I try to pull them to the side, take them if I got a room or somewhere, but you got to get them off the stage. You got to get them off the stage, because if you don't get them off the stage, they're going to react, because that's part of it, part of the street, part of it too. You didn't do anything. You let them talk to you like that. So you'll get a totally different reaction if you pull them to the side and whatever, and they don't have an audience. So I found that to be very important in de-escalating a situation. So that's all I want to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wayne. And, you know, a couple of things I want to underline here. And it's funny, Wayne, you saying what you said about like the distinction between triggers and buttons. And again, we're communicating to the person that we're talking to that we hear them. So that would not be my moment to say, no, you're not really have any buttons, you have triggers. Because Wayne's absolutely right. That what you basically be communicating to the person is, I don't hear you and I want you to see it my way. So that's powerful, because when we're de-escalating, of course, we want to communicate to the person that we hear them as we hear them. So when I was speaking to Will Marie, I hear Will Marie, and I'm going to use the language that Will Marie uses. And if Wayne uses buttons, or if Catherine uses buttons, I'm going to use buttons if that's what they're using. So, and one of the things I love about de-escalation, and one of the things I love about motivational interviewing as an evidence-based practice, is I have to adjust all the time. I love that. Because by doing that, by making that adjustment, I can be opening myself to understanding you. And that is what this work is about. And it's funny because, as Wayne was pointing out, that, you know, if you're not communicating to the person that you hear them, if you jump into, well, I'm going to educate you about this or whatever, regardless of whatever the topic or word may be, you potentially could escalate the situation. Our colleague who mentioned that beautiful strategy of taking the pause, I could imagine that could escalate a situation where a student or a client says like, well, what the hell do you mean you're going to walk away for a moment? I could see that escalating the situation too. And the thing I want to underline, folks, and this is why there isn't any prescribed formula, there are tools we use, is we want to be attending to the moment as the moment is unfolding. And we want to be adjusting and applying the skills that we have in this process as the process is unfolding. So I'll give just a concrete example, and then we're going to go to Noelle, which is that, let's say I was talking to Wayne, and Wayne says, oh yeah, my buttons are being pushed, blah, blah, blah. And I say, no, Wayne, you don't have buttons. These are your triggers and whatever. And he goes, and he's like, no, I'm telling you I have buttons. I have a choice. I can either hold on to my position, or I can say, oh, you know something, Wayne, I got that wrong. Yes, we're talking about your buttons. We're talking about buttons. My goal is to communicate to Wayne in that moment. And the reason I'm mentioning this example is because I want you to understand that in the process of de-escalation, many times we have to course correct. We have to adjust in order to be in the moment with that person. And that doesn't mean you've done anything wrong, folks. It simply means you're in the moment, you're assessing the moment, and you're assessing the reaction of the person as the moment unfolds. So the fact that we have to adjust and course correct means we're attentive to the moment. So I want to thank everybody for kind of leading to that particular point, because it's a critical thing to understand. And please hear me when I say to you, it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It means now you have an opportunity to adjust. You can adjust. Noelle, the floor is yours.
So with that said, I think the operational definition of a button or a trigger would be an intense emotional reaction. And so, yes, that does happen. And yes, that is something that we have to acknowledge and be aware of. And that's what I think, is the immediate reaction to that. It is acknowledging it. That this has happened in me. This person or whatever the situation just pushed a button or a trigger, but it's an intense emotional reaction. I don't have all the control over that. Sometimes it comes from a traumatic experience. Sometimes it comes from, transference or whatever, right? So it's the immediate acknowledgement of this de-escalating. So
yes, and Noelle, I want to underline what you're saying, because what you're reinforcing is letting the person know, I see you and I hear you in the moment. And that's powerful. And as our colleague said early on at the beginning of this learning community conversation, that sometimes the person just needs to know that they're being heard and that they're being seen. And the reality is, folks, is we have the choice as to whether we're communicating that or not. And what I'd like you to walk away with, if you only walk away with one thing from our two-part conversation, and I hope you walk away with more than one thing, but if you walk away with one thing, is that in the process of de-escalation, there is great power and value in being able to communicate to a person, I hear you and I see you. And that's not the same thing as saying, I hear you and I see you, because I've heard people say that. I hear you, I see you. That's not the same thing. Saying that is not communicating that. There is a way to communicate. Wayne, the floor is yours.
Also too, as a professional, when I, maybe make a comment to the person who said whatever, just to say this here, push the buttons. I, as a professional, don't have to say that. I could say, when such is triggered, when these emotions, so I can give them another language, what I'm saying? I don't have to actually, say that to them, so maybe I can speak in a more strength-based language. Say, I know when certain things, trigger you, this is how I react, whatever, how you want to phrase it. Just like I'm gonna give a scenario, like a lot of times I have clients and say, oh, my urine was dirty, I don't believe in dirty urines, what I'm saying? Oh, you had a positive urine. I'm not gonna go back and say, oh, you had a dirty urine, what I'm saying? Because that's not what you call it, So I can always reframe it and talk in a different language. And like you said, somebody said, that's why I love motivational interviewing, because, sometimes we gotta always kind of, go in different directions.
Yeah.
It's not one thing. And also it helps me to look at myself instead of saying, okay, the client is resistant, whatever. No, maybe something I'm doing is not working. It's easy to put it on them. Oh, they're not doing whatever. No, maybe me. Let me go back to my bag of tricks. Let me go back to my tools and try something different, So that's what I've learned, also throughout the years.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, well, Marie, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of clarify. So I did, yeah. So I did say that I don't, you raised a question at the beginning, like, do you think we have buttons? And I said no. So
right.
It's not that I'm not in a de-escalating situation. I'm not gonna tell the client nobody's pushing your buttons. So no. I just believe that I don't, and that's what I teach my clients in other scenarios, in sessions and so forth, because I want to allow them to be mindful of you know, not to give the power to somebody else of their emotions. But I will not use that language in a de-escalating situation. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, you want to be understood
Yeah.
clearly, and you are making a very important distinction, which is that when we're providing services and we're not in the process of de-escalation, it's a very different environment than if we're in a situation that we have to de-escalate. We use different skills at different moments, depending on what's happening in that moment. And what we're focusing on as a learning community is we're focusing on what are the ways of being and the tools that we can use to help to bring something down that's up, or to prevent something from further escalating in order for it not to turn into a difficult situation. I'm going to share my screen briefly and just walk us through a couple of things. And then what I'm going to suggest that we do, believe it or not, I'm going to suggest that we take a 15-minute break. So a couple of things I'd like us to consider, and many of the scenarios that people have offered really speak to these elements. And this first one is this, that the idea of trying to educate or reason with somebody when they're in a state of high affect, when they're in a moment that's escalated, is probably impossible. So our goal, instead of trying to reason or educate somebody, our goal can really shift to trying to reduce arousal of that person, help bring their affect down, communicate to them that we see them and we hear them. And hopefully that will make it possible for them to be stable enough to then engage in conversation if conversation is warranted. The other thing that I'd like to throw out is that oftentimes when someone is in an escalated or an escalating state, they are operating out of one of 3 and 4 sometimes human impulsive reactions: fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. And our colleagues who were in the learning community yesterday are very familiar with these 4 because we spent a lot of time talking about them. But clients and patients have these reactions and responses when they're in high affect too. They revert to a more reactive kind of part of their brain, and they may respond with fight, flight, running away, freeze, deer in the headlights, not able to move forward or backward, or fawn, where they become sort of people pleasing, yes, yes, yes to everything, where they're just trying to placate you. And what the other thing I'd like us to consider is that de-escalation as a process, it does require practice. I said this earlier, and it can be practiced to a point where that it can become second nature, where you can find yourself in a situation that either needs to be escalated, it needs to be de-escalated, or a situation that is escalating, and it can become second nature to change the tone of your voice, to speak more slowly, to try to communicate to the person, reflect back to them that you hear what they're saying. So I'd like us to consider the idea that the process of de-escalation does require practice, and it can become second nature. I see that some more has come in the chat. Katie writes, at all our health centers, we talk about different risk mitigation strategies, moving others out of the area, moving things that can be thrown, directing the person to the exit to maintain a safe environment for everyone. When the person comes down from their escalated state, then a discussion about what happened and how to avoid it in the future, the strategy we try to take, although this is not always logistically possible for us. Absolutely, Katie. And that absolutely, and I love the way that they're framing that risk mitigation. And that's risk of harm or damage to everyone, including you. Katie also adds, I think for us, the reason for the focus on risk mitigation is based on the recognition that trying to reason with a person who is violent at the height of their escalation is impossible. Katie, I could not agree with that more. Again, the goal can shift to attempting to diffuse, bring down the affect, and communicate understanding. Minimize the harm that will be caused at the height of escalation to give the person the best chance to repair the relationship, make amends when they come out of the escalation. Again, I couldn't agree with you more. Yep, absolutely. And I get that you're connecting to the conversation as we go forward. Fantastic. So it makes perfect sense. I can't thank you enough for your continued focus on this. That's fantastic. I would like us to take a 15-minute break. So let's take a 15-minute break. We'll cover the last piece of what I'd like to cover for this particular part of our conversation. So let's take a 15-minute break. We'll see everybody back in 15 minutes. Have a wonderful break, and we'll see you soon. All right. Welcome back, folks. We are beginning to bring the first part of our learning community conversation about de-escalation to conclusion. And we all know what the optional post part 1 learning community learning opportunity of watching the video is, and we'll put that link in the chat again. We're not naming any names as to where that link came from, who in our learning community shared that. Pay no attention to the man who just raised his thumb up. So folks, just as a way of moving into the next part of what we're going to do, what I'm going to ask everybody to do is just take a moment and let your mind kind of sift through briefly, try not to, how can I put this? Try not to overthink this. But based on what we've been talking about so far, based on where we are in our learning community conversation about this topic, what's one thing that stands out to you about your experience so far? And again, no need to explain it to anybody other than yourself. But what I'm going to ask you to do is if you could just type in the chat one thing that stands out to you about your experience in our learning community conversation thus far. There's no right or wrong here. It's just whatever stands out to you. And just as a way of kind of jumping into how we'll kind of round out or conclude today, what's one thing that stands out to you about your experience of our learning community conversation today? And again, there's no right or wrong about it. And again, feel free to just type it in the chat. And if you've already typed it, please take a moment and read what other people are writing in the chat, as I'm going to be reading it as they're coming in. And again, no right or wrong here. It's just simply what sort of stands out to you at this point in our learning community conversation, in this learning community that we are building together today. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm reading these as they're coming in. Please take a chance to read them. And again, this is just a mini opportunity for you to reflect on your experience, where you are in our learning community at this particular time. There's no right or wrong here. This is just your reflection on something that stands out to you at this particular time. Fantastic. Wonderful. And again, folks, thank you so much for reflecting on this. And please, if you haven't had a chance to share your reflection in the chat, please do, so that everybody can benefit from your reflection. Fantastic. Okay, wonderful. And again, if you haven't had a chance to put your reflection in the chat, please go ahead and do that. Just so, yeah, absolutely, Guillermo, it takes time. Absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, thank you for your reflections. And again, feel free to add to them if there are others. I'm going to share my screen. And again, these are some basic considerations that we've been entertaining and discussing since we started this conversation, which is very exciting to me. I very much, I love having this conversation in learning communities about de-escalation, because it truly is an opportunity for ongoing reflection, growth, and refinement. So I would like us to just consider, though, and I've said this intentionally a number of times since we started this learning community conversation, is that de-escalation is a process and it's not an event. And you'll notice this is probably the biggest type font I've used in the slides so far. And I really want to emphasize that, because oftentimes de-escalation is reduced to the event of de-escalating. And if there's a second thing that you walk away with in terms of our time together in parts 1 and 2, is that you'll think of de-escalation as a much broader process and not just the event of de-escalation. Okay, so that's my hope, that everybody will walk away with that from parts 1 and part 2. So given that it is a process, that it is not an event, let me share the following with you. That you can think of de-escalation, this process of de-escalation, is having a before, during, and after the event of the actual de-escalation, which is often the thing that we focus on most, which is the event, which that would really be kind of the during part of it. But what I'd like us to consider as a learning community, and we've already been considering it, but I have a slide that sort of supports that, is that we can think about it as a before, during, and after process. So as part of the before, what we can consider is the idea of planning to de-escalate, meaning that we think about, well, what are some of the situations that have occurred in our setting? Are there any recurrent themes? Are there any recurrent locations of where these de-escalation incidents or events take place? So we can intentionally plan around this, and then we can prepare. We can do an inventory and have a sense of, these are the situations that actually happen within our setting. How are we going to prepare ourselves, our program, and our site to effectively respond to these particular situations? And notice, folks, these 2 bullets so far are already before. These are before we're actually in the moment of de-escalation. So I'm suggesting that as part of the process, we plan and we prepare before. And then I'd like to add a third P, which is practice. Now, in prior learning community conversations about this topic. And I couldn't agree with the individuals who shared this in the past. They have made the point that practicing to de-escalate is very different than actually being in the moment of de-escalation. And I agree with that, and I share that perspective. And I'd like to still underline that practicing, saying, hey, we know that this particular type of scenario happens. It happens in this particular setting. Let's play it out. Let's practice how we're going to respond to this, how individually we're going to respond, how as a team we're going to respond, how as a program and as a site or an organization we're going to respond. And I would like to throw out, yes, there is a difference between practicing and there is a difference between being in the moment and doing it. And practicing can help one become more confident and skilled at actually conducting the de-escalation in the moment. So what I'd also like to suggest is that just before one responds to the telephone call to come down to the reception desk or the lobby, or just before one walks out of one's office, or even just before you're about to say something because a moment has begun to escalate in front of you, that you can take a moment to prepare yourself. You can ask yourself, how am I doing right at this particular moment? How am I managing at this particular moment? So just keeping that in mind, that there's planning, there's preparing, there's practicing what you've prepared, and then there's preparing yourself just in the moment. Reminding yourself of the practice, of the plan. And then we're actually in the moment of de-escalation. And hopefully we're able to be flexible, we're able to adjust, we're able to use whatever tools and skills we have. We are able to communicate effectively, that we are listening and that we are trying to understand. And we are using many of the nonverbal and verbal communication skills that we have to help to de-escalate the situation. And then after that, now many people have told me during these learning community conversations that the after for them, and if this is the case for you, type an F for familiar in the chat. If this is the case for you, that after the de-escalation, I go back to my desk and continue my work. If that's familiar for you, type an F in the chat. So what I want to underline in regard to that, and I can clearly see by looking at the chat that some people are responding. Some are saying that it's not familiar, and somebody is also writing, no, there needs to be a debrief. I couldn't agree with you more, but I want everybody to acknowledge, and please do consult the chat, please acknowledge that for some people that is familiar. And what I'd like to suggest to you is, I agree with our colleague who said, no, there needs to be a debrief. What I'd like to suggest is that after a person or a team has de-escalated, it's important to seek support and to debrief. And what can happen after that is that one can individually or as a team or a group reflect on what happened, and then one can go back to the planning board in terms of, is there anything we're going to adjust or add or subtract in our plan in order to make sure that we are effective and that everybody remains safe and healthy during this process. So I just wanted to throw that out there for you to consider, that de-escalation does have a before, during, and after, and to give you a roadmap of things to consider in regard to that. Yes, incident reports and debrief typically happens following most major events, but not always following a de-escalation. Yeah, and what I'm throwing out for us to consider as a gold standard is that it happens after every de-escalation. Okay. Most common, Katie writes in the chat, what we've learned from our data, most common difficult behaviors include sexual harassment, outbursts regarding controlled substance prescriptions, and our medical assistants and front desk staff are most likely to get the brunt of disrespectful treatment. Again, and Katie, thanks for being so specific, because what your data has shown you, it's given you like a plan or targets of intervention. It's really, thank you for sharing that and being so specific. And Wanda writes, I'm in need of de-escalation techniques during initial intake meeting with participants, guardian, and students, than when engaging the student privately. Understood. And again, the idea that you're able to identify the areas where you need to do that is important. Excellent. Good. And some people are saying that they check in the following day. Absolutely. Okay. So before, during, and after. The final thing that I'd like to share with you, and then we'll take a couple of moments to reflect before we conclude for today, and we may end a few minutes early if that's possible. But what I'd like to suggest is this model, this four-part model that really gives us a framework to think about de-escalation and how we want to be and the approach we want to take when we de-escalate. And again, that's not in any, this lens, this four-part lens of approach is not in any way taking away from the before, during, and after. In fact, it's just going to inform how we may respond during any part of that. So again, this care, welfare, safety, and security model. From the care perspective, that as we engage in de-escalation, that we are really trying to see the situation through the client's eyes. And it's hard to do that when one feels that one's safety is at risk and safety is critical. And unless people feel safe, workers as well as patients and clients, it's really hard to do any of the service provision or any of the work that needs to get done. But using this model as kind of a guide, we do want to try, if we can, to look at situations through the eyes of the client or the patient. And as has been mentioned consistently through our conversation, that we're trying to communicate our compassion and our empathy through our nonverbal as well as our verbal behavior. Because again, if we're communicating compassion and empathy, that in and of itself can contribute to de-escalation. And that we're taking the time. What this bullet, I believe, is referring to is that there is sometimes an opportunity, and someone alluded to this in the chat earlier, there is sometimes an opportunity to debrief with the client or patient to help them to learn from the experience as well, in a non-judgmental, non-punitive way, if that's possible, given the situation. And I also want to use this as another way to reinforce or underline the importance of debriefing for us with our teams and with our colleagues. So from the welfare perspective, and this was mentioned earlier, Goldie mentioned this about not demeaning people, that we want to, as we think about the welfare of the people we provide services to, we want to make sure that we do everything that we possibly can to prevent humiliation, embarrassment, or re-traumatizing those folks as they're in our care. And I'm very curious, and I'm going to ask everybody to respond to this who can in the chat. What I'm going to ask you to do is, if you think about the people that you provide care or services to, what percentage of that population and you can use a percentage, from 0% to 100%, what percentage of your population do you think has experienced or is experiencing trauma? And I'd be very curious to have you respond in the chat to that. What percentage of your population do you think has experienced or is experiencing trauma? 100, 90, 85, 75, 100, red, underlined, 99.9. So far, I think, if I haven't missed it, 75% has been the lowest. And Ashley writes, you need to assume that everyone you come into contact with has experienced trauma. And it's funny, Ashley, because as an assumption, I would venture to guess that there's probably very little harm in that assumption, that it's possible that just about everybody you come into contact with has experienced either or is currently experiencing some sort of trauma or secondary trauma, intergenerational trauma, or historic trauma. So thank you for responding to that. Again, we want to do our best to see if we can be fostering relationships that are based on trust and understanding. And we want to do and consider that when someone is escalated and they are engaging in a particular type of communication or particular behavior, that potentially can be insight for us into what they're really trying to communicate. Goldie, I see that your hand is raised. So by all means, go ahead. Feel free to unmute and make your comment.
Oh, no, Mr. Paul, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat that says one assumption that is safe to make is that everyone has received some trauma.
May have.
I would not have said that before COVID. I would not have made the assumption because there could be one child that might have got pissed off the block before me, but it's and there's nothing else going on. There's
Yeah.
but because of but since COVID, Mr. Paul, I do say everybody. I dare say not one person has not been affected by that. We had staff members that died from COVID, which is crazy that some of my coworkers we taught, some of our, you know what I mean? There were some students that were and we could just go on and on. So I dare say before COVID, I would not have assumed that everyone has. Since COVID, oh yeah.
Okay. And Goldie, thanks for adding that. And I'm very sorry to hear about your colleagues who have passed. And I don't use this word lightly, and I mean it quite clearly. What a tragedy. What a tragedy for these losses. And again, thank you for putting that also.
And you know what, Mr. Paul, that's why even the social emotional learning, the techniques that even though I use them on an elementary, middle school, high school level, I still find that I can tailor make them to when I'm counseling with my young ladies doing our meetings.
Sure.
So yeah, and then also I had put in the chat earlier that I had said that we're going to operate from a perspective of care, not from a perspective of chaos. So, and someone else dropped this on me that just because you're going through a battle, I'm not going to get on the battleground with you. I can help you and give you positive energy and positive strategies, but you're not going to put me on the battleground or even your peers on that battleground with you.
Yeah. And again, Goldie, thanks for adding that, because what I feel like you're underlining for us and reminding us about is how important establishing and maintaining boundaries is, because that is a beautiful definition of a boundary. You may be on the battlefield. I can have empathy. I can be present
Yes.
with that, but I'm not going to join the battle in terms of
Mhm.
I'm not going to battle you in
Mhm.
that situation. And that is what the expectation is of professionals who provide care. Where the and I'm using that word professionals as regardless of your degree or your education or your training. Professionals, if you're in the position where you have the opportunity to be talking to clients or to patients,
Mhm.
I'd like to, and this is my take, I'm making an I statement here, you are a professional
Absolutely.
and you are part of that person's care, regardless of your role. You may not be their counselor, but you're still part of their professional care. So I just want to underline that. I'm going to go back to my screen just briefly. And again, just reiterating this idea that, you know, when people are escalated and they're engaging in behaviors and they're communicating in a particular way, that also can be an opportunity for us to gain insight into their situation. And again, we have to have the ability to take that in and reflect on that and see what it may be teaching us or showing us about their situation. And that, of course, means we need to be in a place and state to be able to do that. From a safety perspective, and I want to underline something here because this gets, I think, lost sometimes when we're talking about de-escalation, because there's a lot of emphasis about safety for the patients and the clients. And of course, that's important. The clients and the patients must be safe. I also want to add, so must you as the providers, as the people doing this work. If you're not safe, how can you be expected to be at your most effective? How can you be expected to be at your most empathic? So if I was editing this slide, I would add safety for all in all caps. So this has been mentioned earlier. And again, Lyra really illustrated this beautifully in the scenario that she shared with us from her practice of that being aware of, and sometimes we have this insight and sometimes we don't. But being aware of precipitating factors or early warning signs can really be a powerful, powerful tool because we can intervene to reduce harm to anybody that might be in harm's way. Also, making sure that we are intentionally establishing and maintaining a social service provision, physical as well as emotional environment that's safe. And then being very specific about wanting to use the least restrictive interventions possible. Now, I want to pause on this one for just a second, because I want to acknowledge that there are some instances when safety is particularly in question, where we do need to take perhaps what might be the most serious actions, calling the police, dialing 911, whatever that may be in your particular setting. And I want to acknowledge that there are situations where sometimes that's absolutely necessary. I would also like to simultaneously acknowledge that compromising your safety to avoid that is not acceptable. And that's where the before, during, and after of the process of de-escalation can come in handy. And let me give a concrete example. If, and I'm thinking of Wayne as I say this, if you're not in this alone, if you are de-escalating and you are part of a team, You may know that your colleagues are there for you. You may know that there is a process there for you. Therefore, you have the skills and the support to manage the situation where you are. So I just want to underline, no one should ever be compromising their safety by not doing what needs to be done in order to maintain your safety and the individual's safety. And if there's enough of a structure and a system in place, it may mean that your capacity to manage a situation may be increased. Safety in many ways, folks, and let's be very clear about this, is non-negotiable. You can't be expected to be at your best, your most effective, your most able to de-escalate when you feel safe too. Lyra, I see that you've raised your hand. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I wanted to comment on what you said and just echoing with regards to, I have an associate who works with the Office of Mental Health. She works with mentally ill patients. And the situation is that the client escalated so quickly that there really wasn't any time for her to intervene. In a matter of, I guess, seconds to minute, the client punched her in the nose and then punched her in the mouth. In that situation, I guess the afterwards is how we, address the situation and trying to prevent ongoing events of the same scenario.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know something? There are many strengths within our learning community today. And hopefully everybody will be able to come back for part 2. And I want to really underline something, which is a strength, and I want to thank you for this. That you're keeping this conversation rooted in reality. Because the work we do is not easy, and the situations we are exposed to, the situations that we address, sometimes, and I'm going to put it this way, they sometimes play out horribly. What Lyra just described is a horrible outcome. The fact that a staff person could be assaulted in that way, that is an outcome that we want to do everything we can before, during, and after to avoid. And it doesn't mean that it prevents it from happening. And it also underlines, if stuff like that does happen, we have to have a process afterward to evaluate that, to take care of that staff person, to take care of the team members associated with that staff person, so that people can continue to do their work. So it really speaks to how important, yes, and EPAs, employee assistance programs, can be very helpful in that. And program staff, along with administrators, can come together to really take a hard look at how something like that happens and how are we going to go forward from that. So I really want to thank Lyra and many others for keeping this a rooted in reality look at this process of de-escalation. Wayne, I see you have your hand raised. Go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just listening. That was a horrible situation. And, just for safety, sometimes I try not to, box myself into a situation, you know what I'm saying? It's always having, try to always have like an out, I mean, like it may not, be possible, but try to, like I said, try to situate yourself that you can, move away. you know.
Absolutely. And again, this idea of one of the tools we can consider is our office setup, where we are in approximation to the client and to the exit. Do we have access to the exit if we need it? Absolutely. Great point, Wayne. Thank you.
Mhm.
So folks, I'm going to share my screen one more time and just share this last bit of consideration. Again, the security piece of this 4-part model, the idea that when a person is in an escalated state, we've established, and it seems that as a learning community, we've accepted the idea that they may be in a state of heightened affect. In addition to what we say and how we say it to that person, through communicating to them that we are making every effort to understand them, we can also create opportunities for them to make their own decisions. Sometimes a situation can be too escalated for a person to be allowed to make their own decisions. And sometimes it can be a very de-escalating opportunity when we allow a person to exercise their autonomies. We can also communicate to people that no matter what is going on or what is happening, we will always do our best to honor that individual's interests and their well-being, and that we will always do our best to interact and communicate in a way that is communicating respect to them, even if we don't like what they're saying or what they're doing. Because of the role we're in, we can do our utmost to continue to communicate that respect. Now, I see that we are about at our time for today, and I want to put in the chat the link for the video that is the optional learning opportunity for us. And what I can tell you is we will begin our learning community conversation focusing and considering that particular TED Talk that was shared with us. And again, we'll spend a little bit of time on that. So I invite you, if you choose to, I'm going to invite you to exercise your autonomy, that if in between now and when we see each other on Monday, if you get a chance to watch that particular video, and I'm going to let the person who shared that with us say if there's any additional remark you might want to make, Jason, about teeing up the watch of that video if somebody chooses to watch it. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about that particular video or your take on that particular video? So I'm going to give Jason the opportunity to unmute and add anything if he wants. And Wayne, I did see that you raised your hand a moment ago. I'm not sure if there was something else you wanted to add. You're good. Okay. All right. Jason, was there anything else you wanted to say, or do you just want to let people watch it and then we'll discuss it, or what was your thought?
Just that helped me become a better facilitator.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Jason. Folks, I cannot thank you enough. I'm really looking forward to seeing you on Monday. Have a wonderful and safe rest of your week, and have a wonderful weekend. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody on Monday. Take good care, and thank you so much for everything you brought to the conversation today.